Thank you, Kenneth. I really like that line, you can win even if you come in last place, or something like that. Because it's not about the journey, or excuse me, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey, which is kind of what I'm going to be talking about today, so that's perfect. My title today was Blissful Living, which sounds lovely, doesn't it? To live blissfully. It also sounds like a pipe dream at times, because in order to live blissfully, you first have to find your bliss. And then, as Joseph Campbell, who was, you've probably heard of him, an American mythologist, stated, you must follow your bliss. So follow your bliss. It's an aphorism that Campbell shared in multiple interviews in the last 15 years of his life. He actually never wrote about it. He only spoke about it. But it's wisdom grounded in a personal experience and a lifetime spent studying myths. And what is religion if not myth? A lot of people don't want to admit that about their religion, but all religion is just myth. And he distilled decades worth of knowledge and work into that one simple sentence: follow your bliss. That's my phone ringing. Thank you, dear. It's like, who has their phone on? Oh, that's my ringtone. That's me. Please silence your cell phones. No.
Shame that bag doesn't match your outfit.
That's right, it doesn't. All right, so Campbell wrote extensively on the hero's journey as well, which is a narrative archetype where the hero goes on adventure, he learns something really important, he emerges victoriously from a battle, usually a mental one as well as a physical one, and then he comes home transformed. And Campbell had a huge influence on Hollywood, actually. So Star Wars, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, Matrix, these are all classic stories of the hero's journey. So I've been thinking a lot about this lately because my life hasn't exactly been blissful. Between those ongoing home renovations, which started in October, and they seem to never end, but I know that they will eventually. And because, in the past few months I've lost a few friends, and let me tell you, there's nothing like having a bunch of friends die that make you question everything about life, right? Yeah, see, she knows. And in my haze of malaise that I was kind of living in, the Campbell quote, follow your bliss, came to mind. And I decided that I needed to find mine again because it had felt like it had been a while since I felt blissful. So I started by looking up the definition of bliss, which is surprisingly simple. It's 4 words: complete happiness, paradise, heaven. Complete happiness, paradise, heaven. That is the official definition of bliss according to Merriam-Webster. So then I wanted to know why Campbell grasped onto that particular word, because it really does kind of feel out of reach, doesn't it? Complete happiness, to live in paradise, to live in a state of heaven at all times, it seems out of reach. But he had been following his passion throughout his entire life, and at one point that actually brought him to study the mythology of India. And in particular, he learned the language of Sanskrit. And I'm probably going to butcher these terms, so I apologize. But he considers Sanskrit to be like the true, most purest form or language of spirituality. And there's a term that represents the brink of transcendence. And it's Sat Chit Ananda. Sat means being, Chit means consciousness, and Ananda means bliss or rapture. How'd I do on the pronunciation?
You did really good.
Yes. All right. Good. So Campbell thought to himself that he really didn't know if his being or his consciousness were what he called proper. But he did know where his rapture was. He knew where his bliss was. So he hung on to that, knowing that by doing so, it would bring him into his consciousness and into his being, which I think is very telling at just how astute he was spiritually, how spiritually aware that he was, because he recognized that it's in a state of happiness and peace that we are most easily able to connect with the divine, which is where our consciousness and our being lie, with the divine. That's our oneness. So Campbell's definition of bliss is Our bliss is the what, where, and when we feel most authentic, most ourselves. It is what we are doing when time drops away and we reside in the internal now. So in contemplating all of this, what really struck me was that bliss is really going to be different for each and every one of us. It's a very subjective thing, happiness, because we all have our own paths to walk with different histories and experiences and expectations and goals. My bliss is not going to be your bliss. I have to discover my own bliss by listening to myself, following clues dropped by the greater part of my being, just as you do. We all have to do this. And in front of us, there's always this array of pathways, of walkways that we can choose to take. And every decision that you make every single day takes you one step further on one of those paths in front of you. And some of those paths may promise security. Some may promise comfort. Some may promise societal approval. Others may promise adventure, and some may even promise debauchery. You get to choose. But for most of us, even with all of those paths in front of us, there's a deeper yearning within. There's a desire for something more, something that resonates to the very core of our being. This is the path to your personal bliss. And if you find yourself on a path that has already been paved, it's someone else's path. We can't follow in somebody's footsteps for too long, because we are all unique, walking, talking expressions of the divine presence. We are all unique individual expressions of God, and therefore our paths have to be just as unique as we are. You have to find your own way to bliss. Just like all the heroes and all the stories, we get to go on our own journey. The good news, though, is that Campbell often reminded us that the myths of old, they are not mere stories, but maps for the soul. Isn't that a great description for religion? Maps for the soul. We can use the same guidelines of the hero's journey to find our own way. They can't tell us where bliss is, but they will tell you what happens when you begin to follow your happiness, what the obstacles are that you're going to run into. These old myths depict heroes venturing forth, facing challenges, and ultimately returning transformed. In these journeys, they mirror our own. The internal struggles, the external obstacles, and the ultimate triumph of finding our true calling, which is what we do by following our bliss. So he speaks of bliss as a wellspring of joy and fulfillment that lies dormant within each of us. It's the feeling of being completely absorbed in an activity in a time when time itself seems to just disappear. It's the artist lost in creation, the scientist consumed by discovery, or even the volunteer touched by the act of giving. So we have to ask ourselves, what makes me enthusiastic? Whatever that is, follow it. The bliss is the message of God to yourself, because that's God speaking through you, but are we listening? It's those feelings which are the call to bliss. And I say the call to bliss because just like that song, it is not about the destination, it is about the journey. A path paved with passion and purpose, and that path is not going to be a straight line. It's going to wind and weave, and your bliss may even change with time. As we learn and grow, that's why it's about the journey. And if your bliss is just your fun and excitement, then you're on the wrong track. Because bliss isn't just about having fun. We must know where our bliss is, and that involves knowing deep down within yourself that place where the internal struggle starts. Because blissful living isn't simply a matter of choosing whatever one wants and then waiting for the universe to hand it over. All right, we know that this is not how life works. That's not how manifestation works. You don't just say, I want $1 million and sit there and wait for $1 million to show up. You got to go buy the lottery ticket, right? So bliss is very different from will. We will a lot of things in our life. You might consciously will to become a lawyer or a computer programmer or even a news anchor. But if your bliss, if your passion, if your calling is music or preaching or teaching or building or writing or whatever it is, then by all means follow that. Follow your heart and not your head. The head should be present, and the heart should listen to it now and then. They should definitely be in cooperation, but let your heart lead the way. We don't will our way to bliss. We discover our bliss because it's already within us. We don't have to create it. We just have to find it. This involves analysis. You have to watch yourself and see where the real deep bliss comes from. Not the quick little excitements in life, but the real deep life fulfilling moments. The ones that you've held on to for years. Those memories that you keep going back to that are just so good you can't not smile when you think of them. Those are signposts to your personal bliss. It's not just a matter of what you want, but a matter of passion. What do you keep coming back to? What catches your soul and won't let go? There is a difference between wanting to play the guitar like a rock star and always having a guitar in your hands, practicing 6 to 8 hours a day because you love making music. Those are two totally different lifestyles. One is will. I want to be a rock star, and not doing the work. And the other one is actually doing the work all day, every day. And it's those things that you would rather be doing more than anything else in the world, even if there was no fame, no money, no accolades in with it, that came with it. That's your bliss. If you would do it even without any of that. If you get that because you follow your bliss, that's great. That's even better, right? And I think that's actually what happens. I think for a lot of people, when you actually do follow your bliss, all of that comes, but that can't be your starting goal. We are having experiences all the time which may render some little sense of this, a little intuition of where your bliss is. No one can tell you what it's going to be. You have to learn to recognize it within yourself. We have to pay attention to those moments of pure happiness and really recognize the joy that it brings us. We have to stop ourselves from talking badly about our bliss as well. And you're like, why would I talk badly about my bliss? But we do. How many times have you done something that brought you joy, but at the same time, you considered it a waste of time? Or something that you couldn't do for a living? How many times have you wanted to go bliss out on the beach, but you did chores instead because you convinced yourself that one was more worthy than the other? In a world where we are told that success equals productivity, it's really easy to ignore our bliss and to talk badly about our own bliss. And we've got to stop that because it's those type of thoughts that represent the external obstacles in the hero's journey. And let's face it, we have bills to pay, we have to eat, we need shelter, we live in the real world, but we have this amazing ability, this amazing power, really, to change our perspective. And there's a story that Campbell frequently told about one of his adult students, because he mostly taught college students, younger kids, and somebody asked him, well, what about adults? Can adults still follow their bliss? And he goes, absolutely. There was a man who had, this was in the 70s, India was like the place to be in the 70s, right? It was like, if you were spiritual, you went to India. And he really, really wanted to go to India and study. And Campbell said, well, what's stopping you? And he said, well, I'm married and I have children and I have to provide for them. He goes, well, then you can't go to India, but you can make India come to you. And the man left and thought, well, how can a whole country come to me? But within just a few weeks, he found an Indian teacher in his hometown that was teaching the classes that he wanted to learn. So India really did come to him. He just didn't know how to look for it. And ultimately, after a few years of studying with this teacher in his hometown, he was able to take a trip to India. But he was able to go because he didn't have to bring his family, because it was much shorter, because he already knew everything he wanted to learn. He just wanted to experience it firsthand. So it became a vacation instead of a study. But he brought India to himself. So how do we embark on this bliss-finding adventure? Campbell suggested 3 main pieces to find your bliss, and the first is to seek sacred space. He urges us to create that space within ourselves. It's a time for quiet reflection, a dedicated space where we can disconnect from the noise and reconnect with the whispers of our soul. Through meditation, prayer, or simply moments of solitude, we can listen for the spark of bliss, the activity that ignites a fire within. The second part is to embrace the unknown. Because the path to bliss is rarely a straight line. There will be detours, there will be dead ends, and there will definitely be moments of doubt. But like the hero in the myth, we must persevere. Embrace the challenges as opportunities to growth, and trust that even in the darkness, the unseen hand of the divine guides us. Because God is always there. The divine is always there. That's where our oneness comes in. That is our unity. And finally, he suggests that you find your tribe because the hero rarely journeys alone. Myths are filled with companions, mentors, and guides. So seek out those who share your passions, who inspire and support you on your path. Because together you can navigate the uncertainties and celebrate the victories. He did, most of Campbell's work on finding your bliss actually came from a set of interviews he did with Bill Moyer. And Moyer asked him if he ever had a sense of being helped by hidden hands. And this is his response, Campbell's response. He goes, all the time. It is miraculous. I even have a superstition that has grown on me as a result of invisible hands coming all the time. Namely, that if you do follow your bliss, you put yourself on a kind of track that has been there all the while, waiting for you. And the life that you ought to be living is the one that you are living. When you can see that, you begin to meet people who are in your field of bliss, and they open doors to you. I say, follow your bliss and don't be afraid, and doors will open where you didn't even know they were going to be. And I cannot tell you how many spiritual mentors, leaders that have lived this, that they say, follow your bliss, follow your dreams, follow your path, and the doors will open. And it's so true. That's one of the signs, one of the clearest signs to know that you are where you are supposed to be, is that things are easy. If you're constantly having to fight, it's not just a mental thought of, ooh, maybe I need to rethink things. It should be a spiritual thought too. Maybe you're not where you're supposed to be if you have to fight all the time. But if the doors are opening, walk through them. And I also think this isn't something that Campbell had in his writing, but I think personally that it's also really important to remember that happiness is not about avoiding negative emotions. That is such a terrible fallacy that people believe that, oh, you can't ever have negative emotions and be happy. That's not true, because we experience all emotions. That is part of being human. And everyone experiences challenges and setbacks. It's part of the hero's journey. Imagine all those movies I mentioned if there was no setbacks. Those would all be really boring movies, right? If Neo just, realized, he went down the rabbit hole and that was the end of the story. Same with the Star Wars. Imagine if there was no setbacks, The setbacks are a part of life. We have to embrace the setbacks. We have to embrace the challenges. If we just sailed through life, it wouldn't actually be much of a life. A lot of people dream of just having an easy life they can sail through. But we don't learn happiness by being happy. We learn happiness by being sad, by being low, by being depressed, because then you realize what you're missing. You realize what you want. And that's the same for all of our emotions. You can't learn one without its opposite. So learning to cope with difficult emotions is a healthy way and an important part in finding your bliss. Challenge your negative thoughts, because our inner critic can be a real downer. The rule that I try to follow is if I wouldn't say it to the person that I love most, then why would I say it to myself? That's a tough rule for me personally because I'm a pretty honest and direct person. So Sometimes I'm like, oh, I would say that to them. So, but yeah, maybe I shouldn't say it to me. But learning to critique the inner critic is a real skill. But if you do it consistently, it becomes easier and easier to tell that inner critic to buzz off and to really embrace self-acceptance and self-love. So it all sounds pretty easy, right? Finding your bliss. A little self-awareness, a little love, and a whole lot of courage is all it takes. But following one's bliss takes commitment and perseverance. This is not something that you can just say, I'm going to go follow my bliss today. You have to do it every single moment. Campbell stressed that it's not the easiest of paths, but it will be the most rewarding. Because once you start following your bliss, you find the greatest gift we possess, which is the potential for a life filled with purpose. Don't settle for a life lived on autopilot. Heed the call to bliss and embark on the hero's journey within. For the depths of your being lies in the key to a truly extraordinary life. So I hope that we all find the courage to follow our bliss every day and every moment in every way. And in doing so, we illuminate not only our own lives, but the lives of all of those that we touch and around us. And so it is. Thank you.